Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Orbit Live event with science fiction authors Adrian Tchaikovsky and Alastair Reynolds. Both of these authors have written a number of novels, but Adrian Tchaikovsky's new one is Shards of Earth, which is out today in the US. Alastair Reynolds has Inhibitor Phase coming out in October in the US. You can click on the green button at the bottom of your screen to buy the books and find out more information. Throughout this event, Adrian and Alastair will be answering your questions. I see a few of you have already entered questions using that Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. Keep them coming. You can also vote on your fellow audience members' questions so that the most popular ones get answered first. This event will be recorded and a replay will be available after it's over. If you aren't able to stay for the full event, you can watch the replay, and you can also share it with your friends or followers using the same link you used to enter the event today. Be sure to follow Orbit on Crowdcast to be notified about upcoming events with more great authors. And now I am very pleased to turn things over to Adrian and Al.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Lovely to be back. We did an event like this about a year ago, Adrian, I think, wasn't it? It was somewhere in the summer 2020.
It was time ago. I'm completely adrift. It was in the past. That's about as much as I can say for any certainty.
It was somewhere in that pandemic thing that we're well out of now, isn't it? It's very much in the rearview mirror. Yeah. Yes, we're on a holding pattern, I think, to some extent. Still doing live events online and just sort of feeling our way through the next few months. What kind of year have you had? Has it been good? Writing point of view?
I mean, for a writing point of view, it's been very productive because that's basically where I go. So when I'm under pressure or when I'm stressed by real life, the writing is what I've got to kind of expiate all of that. Which is why my writing has become progressively angrier over the last 5 years or so. In fact, I can't imagine why. I mean, how about you? Has it been a productive year at least, if not a good one?
Yes, it has been productive. Yeah, it's been a tough year. I'm sure many of us have had, rotten years or rotten few years with all this, everything that's been going on. But like you, I've always found that up to a point, writing is actually an escape valve when the sort of stresses of life get turned up. And I can sort of disappear into my writing and use that external stress quite productively. But there is a point where that doesn't work anymore, and I just crash, and even the writing doesn't get me through it anymore. But I've been reasonably productive. I think probably when we last spoke, I was working on Inhibitor Phase, which I delivered in the autumn of last year, and then you get the round of edits that
the whole conveyor belt of returns to it.
It's quite an involved thing, and you'd love to get this book off your desk so you can focus completely on the next one, but publishing doesn't work like that. You have to keep sort of changing mental gears back into the previous book, and then.
Yeah, I always find that the edits tend to ambush you when you're right in the very middle of something particularly exciting in the new book, and then you lose the thread because you have to stop and do the edit, and you come back and what was I doing with this scene? Where was it going? And the momentum is then completely ruined.
Yes, I've had the extreme case of that was when I was working on one novel, and I took a sort of calculated 4 months off from it to write the Doctor Who tie-in novel I did a few years ago. And I mean, the Doctor Who novel was fine, but when I went back to the other novel, it had just died on me. I mean, I had no sense of, I couldn't find the joy or the spark that I felt had been when I sort of packed it away. So I did eventually sort of kickstart it back into life, but it was very much like sort of reanimating a corpse. And I'm sure that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't taken that sort of interruption, which editing on a micro level, you certainly tears you out of stuff.
I mean, editing uses a different part of the brain, I think, to the actual, the actual initial creation. I mean, I don't think I could stop a long project to do another long project, even a novella. I've certainly occasionally sort of fit in short stories, but that's because I usually blitz them in a couple of days, so everything remains fairly fresh. I mean, God, I used to, earlier on, and I found this isn't the case now, but back when I was starting, there was definitely a window I basically had to start a book in. If I had an idea for a book and I just let it sit in the back of my mind, it kind of went off, and then I wasn't excited about it anymore, and I came to it and it just very leaden, and I never got anywhere with it. I managed to kind of learn the art of kind of keeping things alive in vitro in the kind of the laboratory of my brain until I need them now.
like the cheese you forgot that was in there last year. Yeah.
So shall we talk about what because obviously the one big difference between last year and this year is we both have new books.
We do.
So
yeah. Do you want to? Yours is the one that's most imminently, isn't it?
Today, I believe, in the States. It's been out a little while in the UK. Okay. So I have Shards of Earth, which is book 1 of the Final Architecture series. The basic premise of which is a thing the size of a moon turned up shortly after we humans attained a spacefaring civilization and turned the Earth into an enormous piece of avant-garde surrealist artwork, killing almost everyone on it and turning what was left of humanity into a sort of nomadic diaspora, finding colonies and then being chased off those colonies because the architects weren't done with us. A particular a modified human weapon called an intermediary was able to contact the architects, and the moment that happened, they just mysteriously went away without anyone being any the wiser about what was going on. And now it feels 50 years later, just about when humanity has started to fracture into factions and annoy its neighbors and things like that. Guess what? They're back. So that's the cliff notes. Okay.
And the Earth, does it figure in the books, or has it just been trashed by these?
It figures as art. I mean, one of the early scenes you get to go and see it, and it's actually the thing on the cover, the kind of exploded looking thing is that's the Earth. That's what it looks like now.
No one lives on it anymore, do they?
I think I mentioned that there is kind of a little kind of heavily technologically supported presence on the Earth so that politicians can say that we haven't actually abandoned the home world. Right. But that's about it.
Yeah. A bit like that Surtsey, that bit of rock that sticks up in the middle of the North Atlantic. Yeah. I mean, do you see it as space opera? Is it? Yeah.
I mean, one of the reasons I wrote this book was because I really wanted to write something that was considerably more space opera than, say, Children of Time or Doors of Eden, in that it's got a number of things like the original idea was because in Children of Ruin, the character spent an awfully long time getting from A to B, even within a solar system, because I was trying to do as realistic a sciencey approach as possible. I wanted faster than light travel. I wanted people to be zipping about and meeting aliens and all that sort of thing. And of course, being me, I then came up with a phenomenally complicated system of how it works and why it works that is absolutely integral to what's going on in the book. So I don't think I actually saved myself any work in the end of the day. But yes, the idea that I could have artificial gravity and faster than light travel and the other things that probably won't actually turn out to be possible was one big reason I wanted to write something that was a bit more fluid and space opera and a bit less nailed to physics in my limited understanding of it.
I get that totally. It's an impulse that sort of I very much like to scratch that itch myself as well. Although a lot of what I've written has been sort of, I don't like to call it hard SF, but it's certainly science fiction where the space travel is very strongly constrained by the speed of light, and as you say, you think about how do you generate the artificial gravity and all. You can get a lot of interesting stories out of that, but at the same time, now and again, you sort of look with envy at sort of Han Solo getting in the Millennium Falcon and the planet by lunchtime, and you think, well, there's a whole universe of storytelling that you can also do if you admit fast and light travel and artificial gravity and things like that. So yeah, I totally get it. I mean, the reason I asked about space opera was that there's this kind of I think that sort of unspoken tradition in a lot of space opera, particularly when you have sort of a pan-galactic setting where we're sort of moving out into the galaxy. The Earth is kind of displaced. It's either not mentioned in the narrative, or there's some contrivance why we can't visit it. It's been destroyed I mean, there's a number of books where aliens have sort of put it under quarantine or something like that.
Or it's just been lost in a lot of books. You think, oh yes, lost Earth that we all supposedly came from.
But I think it's because having Earth in the sort of matrix of a space opera somehow works against the sense of wonder or the sense of disbelief in some respect. I don't know. I can't quite.
Yeah. But I think you could do interesting things with Earth, but I think also, I mean, unless that's the focus of the book, it's easier to basically either just kind of forget about it, or in my case, use it as the punching bag. Because otherwise, you think, well, if that's the oldest place that humans have been, then is it like that Star Wars planet that's one enormous city or something like that? And it's just, I think you can get very bogged down in that kind of thing. And obviously, the whole point is you're going out into the stars, and that's the interesting thing that you're doing.
Yeah, because I always think, well, if you have Earth, you have to do all that sort of fairly tedious sort of world building about where is Earth at this point in your imagined future. Is there still a Cardiff? If it's Cardiff, there's still a Merthyr Tydfil. It gets very sort of, you get very bogged down in that kind of stuff, and it's much easier if you can just say no. It's all it's all Trantor or something like that. Do your characters visit other planets in this narrative, or is it more is it weirder than that? How does it work?
Oh, plenty of planets. I mean, the book is kind of divided into sections based on which planet is current to the narrative. So there's a lot of chasing around, but there's a lot of on-planet stuff. I get to have all sorts of fun kind of alien ecologies, and there's a planet called Jericho, which would basically is a death world full of horrible alien monsters, except that humans settled there and were very stubborn. So now it's full of very, very horrible humans as well, and they fight the alien monsters, and it's kind of give and take.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think this is the other thing you get to do with space opera type settings is you do get to have a lot of fun with the planets and with the aliens and without necessarily thinking about, well, how did this actually happen? Except, of course, then they do start, and so you can see throughout the narrative where I'm kind of just back sort of reverse engineering. All right, let's actually do some world building here and some speculative evolution and God knows what. So it's I can't quite train myself out of the logical approach to sci-fi, even though I'm doing something which isn't supposed to be that logical.
Yeah, I'm the same. I try and cut loose and not say not have fun. I mean, I do have fun, but that sort of the sort of imp of world building is always sort of sitting on my shoulder and saying, well, how did they get there then, and how does that planet work? I mean, again, with the Revenger books, which was a trilogy, it was all very. I mean, the whole sort of point of that really was just to sort of do a sort of nautical, steampunk, pirate sort of vibe in space, and it wasn't meant to be really deep world building underpinning it. But you just were, as you go into the stories, you start thinking, well, can I have cows? That kind of thing.
I remember reading through Revenger with my son actually, and the idea it starts off, oh, this is sort of a very wild sci-fi, and then it goes to oh, it's a very wild sci-fi, but it all makes perfect sense.
Well, that's right.
It all kind of works absolutely.
It makes a kind of sense in the end. It makes more sense than it did at the beginning, I think. Yeah. I mean, just again talking about having fun. I mean, you just mentioned Death World. I don't know if that was a sort of a conscious nod to the sort of Harry Harrison Death World, but again, space opera is a sort of literature that allows us to take a lot of sort of affectionate nods at earlier science fiction, not in a cynical way, but you can kind of bring the whole history of the genre into space opera, which to me that's one of the great sort of joys of it.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're all it's all very much sort of standing on the shoulders of others. And yeah, there's every book that's written has a genetic inheritance that includes a host of prior books, both within and without genre.
And the history of the science fiction is very deep now, isn't it? I mean, it goes back many generations. Even a book like Dune, which is the nth attempt to film it is coming out pretty soon. I mean, that's that's a good few generations back in the history of fiction, and even
it's all strata laid down, or a stratum, I suppose.
I think that is one of the things that I most enjoy about particularly space opera, just the sense that you if you wish to, you can have this conversation with so many great books and stories that have been around for 50, 60 years or more. But at the same time, you can come in with a completely fresh angle on it. You can take a completely new spin. Readers aren't obligated to go back and read Cordwainer Smith or Bluth if they don't want to. But if you do want to sort of dig into the history of the genre and sort of mine it, then there's some really amazing stuff there.
I mean, let's talk a bit. So inhibitor phase, which is when is that? That's out fairly soon, isn't it?
I think it's out in a month in the UK, and then in October in the States. And I should have the dates with me, but it was originally going to be out in late July, so I think it would have been out about now. But I think it's coming out later in August in the UK. Yeah.
How does that fit into your existing work?
It's a novel in the Revelation Space universe, which is I'd written early in my novel career. I think my first 4 novels were all interconnected in this universe, and then I've returned to it, and I've written quite a few short stories that fit into it. And I was doing that even in the 90s before I had a novel contract. And I've tried to. How do I feel about it? I don't think of it as a series, and I don't think of Inhibitor Phase as a sequel to any previous book in the whole thing. So pretentiously, I've started calling it a mosaic. It's like there's a future history which exists in my head, and these books are little windows or little shards that open up a little part of that future history. And some of them are sort of situated closer together in the sort of narrative space. Some of them are farther apart. There's big gaps of space between the books and stories where I'm not, you might have to make up the story for yourself.
So it's a little like the Banks's Culture novels. In that way.
And I don't know if he ever had a set, an intended reading order for the Culture books. I kind of read them in publication order, but they were all at the shop in terms of internal chronology. There were late Culture novels and early Culture novels, and it didn't really matter to me as a reader. So I hope that Inhibitor Phase is a book that you can kind of pick up cold if you haven't read any of the other Revelation Space stuff. I kind of wrote it with that mindset.
I think that's a huge. One of the things I started off, my very first books were God help me, a 10-book fantasy series. And I still think I should get little badges made to give to anyone who's actually got as far and finished the 10th book, because there can't be that many people. You do see a drop off. So and in those cases, yes, you absolutely had to read all of the preceding ones to make any sense of them. And a lot of series have done very well with that. But I think they're the huge advantage these days to having a series that you can just pick up any book, and that book works as a story in itself, whilst also kind of being in dialogue with the other books when you get to them.
Yeah, and I thought of it as like this sort of connective tissue. There's sort of minor characters that sort of wander in and out of the books. You might, if you read book X, that might contain some mild spoilers for book Y and vice versa. There's never going to be a reading experience which isn't completely spoiler-free if you're digging into someone else's future history or series. Even the first novel, I've gone back and written stories that are set earlier than that. So, but I hope hopefully it can be read as an entry point.
And I mean, a lot of you, if you're kind of aware of the knowledge that's out there, you can kind of write on 2 levels. In a way that you can write the book so that the new reader coming to it will have a perfectly satisfactory experience, and you can kind of have those Easter eggs and extra kind of hidden nods that other readers are going to pick up. I mean, is that something you think of particularly when you're revisiting the universe?
Yeah, I mean, I was working against myself in a way that there were a couple of points in the book where when I was writing it, where I felt, this is almost a bit too on the nose in terms of putting in little sort of Easter eggs. So I actually took a few of them out near the end because I felt they were too cutesy, if you know what I mean. Just because you invented a weapon in the prefect doesn't mean it has to show up in this book, so there was a couple of times where I said no. I backed off. I thought I'm going to come up with something original, even though it hasn't appeared in the other books. And it's a you have to sort of set that line yourself and try and walk it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there must be a danger of getting too self-referential, to kind of, if it's also, I think, I mean, having been in that position as a reader, it can be very off-putting if you are a new reader and you're kind of peripherally aware that the author is twinkling to certain existing sections of the readership and you're excluded from that. So it's there is a very fine line.
I mean, I was also coming to the book. It's sort of 16, 17 years since I wrote the book that's kind of chronologically closest to this one, which was Absolution Gap, which I wrote in 2003. So that's a hell of a long gap. It's a hell of a long gap for me. Probably even a longer gap for readers. I always think it's like when you get into your favorite band at 20, and then by the time you're 40, it's like they could put out the best album in the world, but it's never going to sound as good as the album you listened to when you were 20, because everything's changed.
Genuinely interested professional question: how much prep did you need to do refamiliarizing yourself with your own universe?
I would have had to do an enormous amount, but first of all, I'd done a couple of books that sort of fit into the timeline. So I dipped in and out, and then I've worked with people who are interested in doing TV treatments for Revelation Space, that kind of thing. Nothing that's ever come to fruition, but it has involved me doing kind of mining the books creatively, going through them, making synopses, character charts, that kind of thing. So it was all kind of booted up in my head on some level. So I didn't feel that I was diving in cold after 17 years.
That's good.
So that would have been quite daunting. And I've been thinking about the inhibitor phase. I've been ruminating on it for at least as far back as Revenger. It was always at some point I'm going to clear the decks and do this new Revelation Space book. So I had a lot of time to sort of think about it and think about how I wanted to use the existing characters and settings, and to what extent I didn't want to use it. And then there's this wonderful thing, Adrian, called Wikipedia. It's a fascinating thing. But people have been very kind, and they put sort of bits and pieces about the Revelation Space lore up on Wikipedia. And I'm not so shameless. I'm not going to go and look at that stuff now and again if I have to jog my memory.
You must have a very detailed Wikipedia ending. For me, even with just working on the same series, because I've just actually handed into my agent the third and last book in the Final Architecture series. I have had to have the first book on hand, and there have specifically been like 2 or 3 details that I have had to check at least half a dozen times each, because for some reason they do not sit in my head in any way.
Yeah. Oh, I'm the same. Yeah. And I mean, I think I don't know if I told you this story last time, but when I was doing the sequel to The Prefect, so I wrote a book called The Prefect, which I retitled Aurora Rising. So it was my choice, nobody else's. So blame me. But then I did the sequel to it, which was Elysium Fire. And again, there was a really long interval between those books. And I sat down with a paperback copy of The Prefect, and I made notes to myself about how the characters worked, how their rank and hierarchy operated, how was the chain of command, what kind of terminology they used, police procedures, everything. I thought, I've got this nailed down. And I wrote Elysium Fire, and it went through. It was a good 2 or 3 stages into the editing process when someone said, "You do realize you've got a character in here who died in The Prefect."
Oh God!
I said, no. This is Mr. Reynolds. He knows best. No, that's absolutely impossible with the amount of research I did. But of course, I checked myself, and they were right. I very foolishly resurrected a character, and I just had that cold, real cold sweat, night terror feeling where you just feel, oh my God, what have I done? And I googled the name of the character, and it came up, search and replace. There were about 12 instances in the book. I thought, okay, deep breath. This is fixable. I can do this. If it had been a character that was salted right through the narrative, it would have been a we probably would have had to delay publication. So that was a real lesson in humility for me. Something like that in intuitive phase as well. So can't wait to find out what I got wrong in that one.
In the edits to the second final architecture book, I found that I'd actually killed a character twice in the course of 3 chapters. So that was.
Who amongst us has not killed a character twice?
This wonderful thing. How would I prefer that they die? I mean, I've got options.
Right. Should we think about?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the most popular question is definitely aimed at you. So shall I start off asking that one? So this is from G Schneider 33.
Oh yeah.
Hi Al, just wanted to know if you're planning on working with Love, Death and Robots again, and what did you think of the adaptations of Zima Blue and Aquila Rift?
Hi there, G Schneider. Thank you for that question. They did a series 2 of Love, Death and Robots. There was some interest in adapting 1 or 2 of my stories, but there were just all sorts of legal impediments, and that meant that couldn't happen. Nothing horrendous, no horror stories. It just was, these things just aren't meant to happen sometimes. I liked very much the 2 adaptations that were done. I think I have, if you put a gun against my head, I'm probably going to go with Zima Blue as my favorite, because I like probably like the story a bit more. It's a more personal story. And I just really love that abstract, more stylized animation style rather than the sort of photorealistic approach for Aquila Rift. But I felt given the constraints, they had to bake those stories down to less than 10 minutes in one case. I think they did a good job. So no hard feelings here, and good luck to them. Tim Miller. I only ever dealt with Tim Miller. He's a lovely man. He was very kind. So no complaints here.
Do you want to pick up the next one?
Well, that's for me. I'm gonna.
The next one is a joint one.
Oh yeah, okay. Sorry, I skipped that one. Yeah, great. Okay, so and this is from Nicholas Ibish. Hi, Nicholas. Since both of you have now done a space opera or space opera adjacent works, do you find them freeing compared to harder sci-fi? I think we've touched on that, but we can certainly amplify that.
I mean, the fascinating thing, because this is the first, although Children of Time has routinely been called a space opera, it's not one that, and I mean, this is where you get to the point you find out that basically every single science fiction writer and reader has slightly different definitions of what is and isn't hard science fiction or a space opera or whatever, or whether those distinctions are even meaningful. But this is the first time I set out to write a space opera, and what it felt like a lot of the time, because I'm a world first writer. I always start with my setting and my the axioms of how the tech works and who are the aliens and what are the factions and so forth. It was a lot like planning a fantasy world. It was a lot like working out how the magic, what can the magic do, and things like that. And so what it really means is there isn't a chunk of rules that you kind of have to get from an external source. So when I was writing Children of Time, or especially Children of Ruin and Doors of Eden, I was liaising with a number of actual sort of scientists and various other experts who were explaining to me how this would work and how that would work and what do we know about this and what is the normal procedure for that. And it's a lot like, if you're writing something set, a whole chunk of Doors of Eden is set in the real world in the modern day. And it's very, very similar to that. There are things that are real at that point that you are constrained by and have to work with. And it can be a hindrance. It can also be a boost, because it gives you, I would never have thought of doing it this way, but that's apparently a thing in the real world that I can utilize that my imagination would simply not have come up with. I mean, how about you, Al? I mean, what's your process for that?
First of all, my process is to say that I also have a kind of narrow definition of space, or I have a particular personal definition of space opera. And I don't really think I've written anything that's really space operatic yet. I mean, maybe the Revenger books. I have a deep love and affection for space opera, but I think which is in a way, that's why I want to write a space opera, because I love it so much. But I think, a space opera has to be this just maybe not a physically big book, but it does need to be operating on a big scale, and it needs a lot of what Brian Aldiss called widescreen baroque. It just needs that, everything pushed to 11, lots of settings, lots of characters, lots of factions, massive stakes. And I haven't really done that. I mean, I've done sort of space opera, I've done science fiction or hard science fiction, whatever you want to call it, with spaceships in the galaxy and interstellar travel. But the everything's much colder than space opera in the Revelation Space universe. It doesn't really hit those space opera beats that I think of as space opera. So I'd love to do a space opera.
It's interesting. I think so. With fantasy, there's this rather weird nebulous boundary between what's called epic fantasy and what's called heroic fantasy, and that's tends to be a scale boundary, and pretty much only a scale boundary. But I think there is definitely a niche for the small focus space opera, because I mean, one of the things I'm doing in Shards of Earth is I'm very much focusing on a ship's crew, and in that I'm absolutely working with a lot of forerunners, especially televisual forerunners like Lake 7 and Farscape and Firefly and things like that, where it's still very much space opera, but the focus is far more on the needs and drives of that little found family of characters, and their own kind of frictions and divides. So I think there's certainly room for something that is space operatic, but doesn't necessarily have the big kind of Dune sort of huge empire, thousands of planets, great big blocks of politics and so forth sliding about.
I mean, is that all that stuff in the background, or is the?
It's, well, I mean, honestly, I go both ways with this one, but I think so. If you look at, say, Farscape or Firefly, it's it's kind of out there, I guess, but it tends not to be crucial to the plot, and when it turns up in the plot, the reaction of the characters is usually just to run away from it. Whereas if with Dune, it's obviously the characters are the movers and shakers rather than just the people caught in the wheels.
Yeah,
that's not what wheels do, by the way. That was intended.
You have something like Lake 7, obviously, where with the sort of budgetary constraints of the BBC, they were trying to sort of evoke a massive settled space operatic universe with the Federation and thousands of planets under this sort of central control. But of course, they could only ever show you, a sort of Port Talbot steelworks from different angles or something like that. so the sort of misdirection was done in dialogue, wasn't it? Like Sir would sort of refer to some trouble brewing on a distant colony or something like that, and it was all in the sort of offhand references that sort of led you to believe there was a lot more going on behind the screens than you were ever shown. So it can be done with the focus can be quite tight, the foreground focus in a space opera, but it can have that sort of implicit sort of scale sort of behind the curtains. Yeah, but I love space opera. I do want to do it, and I've been thinking seriously about that for a while now. But I also want to make sure if I do a space opera, it's like what Adrian was saying about if you made up all these sort of enormously complicated rules for yourself about. Well, again, I would do that. I wouldn't want to just make it a sort of cookie cutter space opera. It would have to have some elements of newness to it.
So I've got another one here for you, which is so this is from C. John Arthur. Hi, Al, just read the Aurora Rising and Elysium Fire back to back and really enjoyed them. Is there going to be an Inspector Dreyfus 3 or even 4?
Thanks, Adrian. Hi, John Arthur. See John Arthur. Thank you for that. Yeah, I hope so. I don't have a schedule for when I might write another Dreyfus book. That's a conversation I need to have with my agent and my publisher, because I've just delivered another novel and I have to start thinking about the next one. I think at some point I've maybe sort of intimated that might be Dreyfus. I don't want to. I don't want people to say, "Oh God, it's another Revelation Space book." But on the other hand, Inhibitor Phase is coming out now, so it would be at least 2 years before a Dreyfus book came out. What I've got to do is come up with a dilemma that is big enough to make for an interesting book that contains a few sort of twists and and hopefully some moral questions. But it mustn't be. It's got to be quite fine grained or calibrated, because it can't be too big an upheaval, because then we would have heard of it later in the Revelation Space Future History. So the Dreyfus books have got to be sort of pitched at quite a surgical level, so they don't throw the whole future history out of whack. But I really enjoy working with the characters, so I hope there'll be another one. I mean, I've said there might even be 5, but take what writers say with a pinch of salt. Thank you, C. John Arthur. And then one for both of us, I think. Yeah, how do you? This is from Nano Tyran.
Oh, hello.
Aaron. How do you go about creating hateable antagonists? We don't do that, do we? We don't create hateable people, Adrian, do we? Surely not.
Well, I mean, back in the before times of about, say, 6 or 7 years ago, I would have said, no, you want antagonists that are kind of deep and meaningful and have their own drives and are realistic and believable. And now how I go about creating hateable antagonists is I look at real life, because real life is apparently full of them. And yeah, we're not short of people to use as models for really real stinkers of antagonists right now, frankly. So yeah, I mean, thanks, 2015 onward for giving us that wealth of material.
Yes, very much the same thought processes there, I'm afraid. Just going back to the second Prefect book, I started it way back, 2015, if not earlier. And again, I was thinking I wanted to write a book about the rise of authoritarianism, about sort of demagogic figures and the disproportionate power that they seem to be exerting. But I really didn't think things. I mean, I thought, well, this is the problem of the moment. It's probably going to burn out somewhere after 2016. That guy will never become president. That referendum will never happen. But demagoguery is still with us. Authoritarianism is still with us. It's not going away. In fact, it's getting worse. So the sort of the world, as Adrian says, does unfortunately oblige by providing us with an infinite supply of inspiration when it comes to hateable or dislikable or negative antagonists or negative protagonists. I try not to put my characters into boxes of exclusively good and exclusively evil. I try and make sure that they're a little bit more rounded than that. And I think history teaches us that even the blackest villains of history were probably quite nice to puppies and things like that. So you do. I'm not interested in writing, Ming the Merciless. I couldn't sustain my interest in a character long enough if they were an absolute two-dimensional black-hearted villain. There's got to be a bit more to them. So you start getting into origin stories and things like that.
I mean, one of the things I tended to find, I mean, in the Shadows of the Amp series, my first fantasy stuff, which rather delightful, is actually just getting a re-release here in the UK and an audiobook too. There are a lot of antagonists because there are 10 books, and so I need an awful lot of villains to get through. And I did find my villains tend to fall into 2 camps. There are the villains I actually kind of like and respect, and there are the villains I don't. And the big distinction tends to be the villains I don't, whose lack of liking and respect tends to be reflected in their fate, which is considerably more ignominious, tend to be the ones who are simply basically motivated by selfishness and by personal power. Whereas when you have villains that are at least working towards something that is bigger than themselves, that's you can kind of, even when that thing they're working towards is terrible, you can kind of at least see a certain something there, a certain flame as to why they're doing what they're doing, that is not purely they want to be more rich and more powerful than they already are.
Yeah, you can, and then you can sort of work, sort of tragic angles in there, because you've got sort of, the person who in their own head is completely well-intentioned and thinks they're serving some greater good, but in fact, they're working to the opposite. But that to me is always a more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It gives me more to chew on as a writer, and then if I can sustain my interest in the character more, then hopefully that will communicate through to the reader. Shall I take a question? Mm-hmm. Oh, your turn next, isn't it, Adrian? Yeah.
Oh yes, sorry, yes. Hi, Al. So this is from, beg pardon, Stephanie Gelder. What were you listening to when you were writing Inhibitor Phase, and what's next from you? And also, I mean, I don't know if you want to throw in, because one thing we didn't get was any suggestion of what Inhibitor Phase is actually about, because we can't.
Yes, right. Yeah. Well, hi, Stephanie. Thank you again for dropping by, and good question. Yeah, what was I listening to? Well, I had an idea in mind when I started thinking about the Inhibitor Phase, and I wanted to bring in a level of reference in the book, but I didn't want to make it too overt. But I've been listening to this is where you kind of like you're treading a line between spoiling the book for millions of people or hundreds of people, and being honest about things. But I particularly like there's an artist called Scott Walker, who was he died a few years ago. He was part of the Walker brothers, and in the late '60s he made 4 absolute, stone cold classic albums: Scott 1, Scott 2, Scott 3, and excitingly Scott 4. And you've got to have these records. They're absolutely fantastic, and they're very ornate. There's a brilliant string productions on them. His vocals are grandiose, melodramatic. The lyrics are just out of this world. But I came to them because I heard one song, which was Seventh Seal, and it turns out that it's Scott's attempt to write a jaunty pop song about the film The Seventh Seal. A piece of, black and white, heavy Swedish art film about knights and playing games with death. But it's a wonderful song. But that led me into an interest in the film, and that mood was something that I wanted to kind of have rippling through Inhibitor Phase. So that's pretty much what I listened to. I listened to Scott 4, which is the album with Seventh Seal on it. But there's also a few other songs on there that play into the book. There's a song on it called Angels of Ashes, which I wrote a short story based off the title about 20 years ago. So it's always been there, a sort of part of my sort of soundtrack to my life. Scott Walker. So there you go. There's other sort of Easter eggs in there which I'm not going to mention. But what it's about? It's about a point in the future where the inhibitors, which are these replicating alien killing machines that have come out from the void to try and stamp out human expansion and human colonization into the universe. And the book begins when most of the colonies have already been annihilated by the inhibitors. There's no interstellar travel. All the colony worlds are in ruins, and there's just a few pockets of humanity left, sort of hunkering down in caves on different planets. And of course, none of these pockets know whether there's any other pockets out there. So they all kind of have to act as if they're the only surviving remnants of humanity, with all the sort of moral pressure that brings. So the book is about a guy who's in charge of one of these colonies, and he has a difficult decision to make at the start of the book about the arrival of a human spaceship, which may inadvertently draw attention to the colony. So he goes out there to deal with this dilemma, and then he gets entangled up in an adventure that catapults him into different solar systems and through the ruins and rubble of the civilizations we saw in the early books. And it's a space opera of sorts, because there's lots of sort of movement and action in there, but it's a relatively it's a short book by the standards of the earlier Revelation space books. It's got a relatively modest cast. So my editor said it's sort of like stealth space opera. I think that's a good one. It's not Dune, But
to clarify from what you were saying earlier, it's a book you can pick up if you haven't read any of the other.
Well, I hope so. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I know every author hopes that, don't they? That's what we say. No one ever says, don't read this new book I've just written, because you'll find it completely perplexing. and none of it will make any sense.
I have literally said that in the past with some of mine.
Yeah. Now, I think these are sort of shuffling in a different order now. I think I can throw this out to both of us. It's from Marcus Farman. Hi, Marcus. With all that's wrong with the world today, do you have hope for a future where mankind will persevere and spread out in the galaxy? Good question, Marcus. Thank you.
Ooh. So we're talking about actual, like, real world hope. I mean, Lord, I still do. I kind of feel that hope is eroding. I mean, it's a bitter thought that probably within my actual lifespan I'll get to find out. That's a terrifying thought, but it's probably the case. I mean, as far as writing, obviously, if you're writing anything other than that kind of near future dystopia, you kind of have to assume it's going to happen. So, in a sense, even the most dystopic science fiction that has people existing in space is profoundly utopic because it assumes we solve those problems. Even the ones, where Earth is destroyed or where, the inhibitors are hunting us all down, that's still an enormous win for humanity. To even be in the position to be hunted down by inhibitors.
My books are actually quite upbeat because there's a future. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to say because obviously any getting into space. I mean, one of the things that doesn't seem to be appreciated with the idea of, oh yes, billionaire in space, that's what money can do. It's not, it's what a vast number of people and an enormously complicated interlocking organization of civilization can do. And the moment you start pulling out the blocks at the bottom of that, like eating things, it all crashes down and then you can't get into space. And you have other things, the hierarchy of needs doesn't start with get into space.
Well, mine does. No, I'm probably less optimistic generally about this sort of thing than I was when I first started reading and thinking about science fiction. When I, there was a point where I would read sort of Larry Niven or something like that, and I think this is broadly a kind of believable roadmap that we'll move out into the solar system, we'll settle nearby planets, and then we'll build slower than light colonization technology, and we'll put people on planets around other stars, and then maybe we'll get FTL at some point, who knows. But I thought it didn't seem ludicrous to me. I'm a lot less sanguine about that now. I mean, I don't necessarily see it in terms of optimism and pessimism, because I think I can see a future where we flourish as humanity, and we do very well, and we look after the Earth, and we might even move out into the solar system. But we might take a look at the galaxy and say, well, actually, we're not actually interested in that anymore, because we know, we have all the scientific return we need from telescopes. We can make a good guess at what the conditions are around any number of exoplanet systems. Maybe we don't actually need to go there. We just know enough that it satisfies our curiosity as a species. So I don't necessarily see it as a negative thing that we might say, okay, we're not going to have the galactic empire. It might just be the sort of, I mean, I'm not interested in the things I was interested in when I was 8 years old. I'm not interested in sweet shops anymore, mostly. But maybe as a civilization, we'll reach a point where, okay, we thought we were going to be interested in that stuff, but now we have the capability. Actually, it's not so interesting anymore, so we can go off and do some other cool stuff, which we weren't thinking about.
That's a fascinating sort of Fermi paradox thought that I've never heard, actually. Just the idea that if you get to a certain point of the civilization, maybe you just decide that going out into this vast, almost completely empty space is probably not the thing. Yeah,
I mean, I think with maybe some modest robotic exploration, but also the sort of the amount of data you can acquire from mind-bogglingly large telescopes is quite amazing. I mean, I always say you don't have to turn over every pebble on the beach to know that you've turned over, that pebbles aren't actually that interesting after a while. So it may anyway. I'm gonna break protocol here, Adrian. I'm going to ask you another question because the next one floating up is for you. Just jump in here and just be a wild rebel. Hi, Adrian. You use capitalization to distinguish between insects and human insect-inspired groups. How does that translate to audiobook versions where you can't hear the capital letters? And that's from Malcolm.
Yeah, this is the thing I do a lot. It's not just the fact that I have, so if you are of the mantis people, it's capital M mantis, and if you are an insect that is a mantis, it's small m mantis. I do it with the thing like called the art, which is the kind of the insect powers they have, and that's capital A, and then you just have art, which is small a, and in the Tiger and the Wolf, you have the shape shifting is called stepping, and that's a capital S, and that works perfectly on the page. And how it translates to audiobooks, it does not in any way translate to audiobooks. I am a constant nightmare to all of my narrators, and I apologize wholeheartedly, but there is literally, you know, I mean, other than have like a little clown horn noise every time I'm doing it, there's no way you can make it work in audio. You just have to hope it just kind of comes over. So yeah, that is very, very bad audiobook protocol. And now audiobooks are a lot more of a thing. It's something I need to be a lot more aware of, but I am almost certainly still doing it in various ways.
I certainly wasn't thinking about how does this work on audiobook level when I started writing. You know, it certainly wasn't a consideration for me. You know, and genre fiction is stuffed with capitals, isn't it? You know, I mean, it's sort of.
Well, the alternative is you invent a word, and sometimes you can get away with inventing a word for a thing, but it's something I mean, because fantasy can be extremely egregious. I mean, I've read the backs of fantasy books where there have been like 9 or 10 completely made up words. You know, the people of this place fighting this thing, but this person is a this thing, and he can do this thing, he can use the this, and I don't know what any of this means. So I tried to minimize that as much as possible, but this is then the pit I've fallen into, in that, you want to repurpose real words, fine. That also has a cost when it comes to someone trying to read out what you have written.
Well, Gene Wolfe, you know, I mean, he wrote, you know, an entire enormous interconnected set of, we shall call it fantasy novels, where it was exclusively repurposed words, isn't it? And
but there, at least, he's using words that nobody is likely to be using in another form. And also, general, he's generally using them with their own actual definition or something very close to it. I mean, and yes, I wish I was that clever, frankly.
Yeah. I always remember the sort of super genetically engineered horses that the cavalry use were the destriers, you know, which is some antique word for horse, but it just works so well, doesn't it?
Yes, with claws.
Yeah,
claws.
Yes, super.
Oh, what have we got? So I've got one for both of us. I've got one for you. So shall I go for the one for you, which has actually got more votes than the other one anyway?
Okay.
So hey Al, so this is from Matt Defoe. Is any plans for further standalone or connected stories novel? I mean, I get we may kind of be treading old territory from what you've already said, but standalone or connected stories novels in the Revelation Space series after Inhibitor Phase.
Hi Matt. Yeah, I mean, I don't feel that I'm done with it. I've got, it's a collection coming out in October from Subterranean Press called Belladonna Knights and Other Stories, and that includes an original Revelation Space story called Plague Music, which I wrote last year, and no one has seen that to date. And I've got, you know, there's ideas on the back burner. Obviously, there's the Dreyfus stuff. So yeah, I'm sure there'll be more. I don't want to sort of nail myself down and say it'll be this year or that year, but I do enjoy revisiting that universe, certainly. Yeah. So thanks. Yeah, thanks for the enthusiasm. I'll try and live up to it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Do you want to pick one you like?
Adrian, this is from Xander. I'm going down a bit now to Adrian. I love the Tiger Wolf series.
Ooh.
Do you have any interest in going back to that sort of fantasy? And then I might ask, do I have any interest in giving fantasy a shot as well? So we can both have a go at this one. That's from Xander.
So the Tiger and the Wolf series is odd, has a very odd place for me. So it's entirely possible that I will go back to that setting, but precisely what the setting is a bit complicated, because it's the same setting as all the Shadows of the App stuff. And when I was writing, you do not have to have read any, thank God, because there's a lot of it, even though I still stand by it. You do not have to have read any of the Shadows of the App books to read The Echoes of the Fall, The Tiger and the Wolf, and its sequels. But if you have, there's essentially an extra layer of what is going on that you may pick up on. And so now, of course, if I'm going back to that setting, I'm going back to the setting of the whole thing. And I mean, there's even there's a series of collected shorter fiction called Tales of the Apt, and one of the novellas in the collection For Love of Distant Shores is kind of the bridging piece between the two series of books, and explains how this group of people get from A to B to kickstart all of the troubles that start sort of exploding in The Bear and the Serpent. And so overall, it's a setting I would love to go back to, and every so often I have talks about people doing things in another medium. I would love to see some sort of games based in that setting, because I think it's extremely gameable with the way it's set up. But my current trajectory is probably not going to allow me to hang the sort of right turn I'd need to go back to it just yet. I'd need a bit of clear space and a bit of leisure, and I guess we get to see how now the books are being reissued and issued in audio. We'll see what sort of pickup there is for that, and what sort of demand there might therefore be, because it's an unpopular thing to have to say, but there's always a commercial reality to saying, well, what do I want to spend the next sort of 9 months doing? Because at the end of the day, we all have to pay the bills.
Very true.
How about you with fantasy, Al?
Well, I came into science fiction through a love of science fiction. I read very little fantasy. I always try not to denigrate it, because I think, it's there's many worth. I mean, it's stupid to say it, but there's wonderful works of fantasy. But I'm not particularly well read in the form. I've probably read fewer than 10 fantasy novels in my lifetime, and I don't think I've got the sort of mental toolkit to do it justice. I think if I started writing a fantasy novel, it would bend towards science fiction. So why not just make it science fiction to start with? So, say if I started writing a detective novel as well, it would bend towards science fiction. So I think
sorry, go on.
No, I'm just not the guy to write fantasy.
I don't think I could write anything that wasn't speculative in some way. So if I was doing a detective novel, it would almost certainly have something sci-fi or something supernatural or some extra dimension to it. Would you write? Because we were talking about Gene Wolfe, and I must admit, I would put Wolfe more in the sci-fi camp. But the books are definitely written as fantasy novels, and there are quite a few other books. You have Dying Earth style books, and there's a whole school of fantasy which you just scratch the surface and you realize actually it's all science fiction, and there is science fiction stuff going on. But the key thing is the characters do not understand that they're in a science fiction novel. They kind of think they're in a fantasy novel. Do you think you might go that kind of halfway house?
Yeah, I'd love to do it if I felt I had the sort of chops to do it, as well as Vance or Wolf. I mean, you really got to be on top of your game to do that stuff well. But yeah, I love that sort of, the sort of Dying Earth thing where, I mean, it's in both, it's in Vance and it's in Wolf, where you've got sort of everything looks like a fantasy novel, but then one of the characters pulls out a ray gun, and it's just this piece of technology that's been left around for thousands of years. And I love that stuff, and of course, it's a Doctor Who was classic. Doctor Who often played with that kind of sense of deep time and forgotten technology. So I love it, and I've dabbled with that in books and stories for sure.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite tropes to read about. I mean, there's the question coming about mining the history of science fiction, and the idea of having either a colony or the population of an ark ship who have kind of gone feral and do not realize that then that they are actually they're from Earth originally, and they've come here, and the things around them are actually technological things rather than purely just sort of powers or the way the natural world is it's something I played with a lot in my writing, and I love reading about it, and you get this. It's a very good way of manifesting that sense of wonder by having characters who do not understand them with, but you have that interesting dialogue of writer direct to reader, where you can kind of let the reader in on what's going on in a way that the characters can't appreciate.
Yeah.
I've got one on the top here from Malcolm. How are we doing? When do we finish? Much longer have we got? Do you know?
How are you? I can stick around for a few minutes if you're okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, I've got one. Sorry, Malcolm has just been displaced. Apparently, I've got one from. So this is the one I was talking about regarding mining the history of science fiction. Who are some authors from decades past you enjoy and would recommend?
Oh, I see that one. Yeah. Well,
Sorry, Malcolm.
I think we've mentioned some names. I always say, well, go back and read Gene Wolfe. He's a writer I come back to over and over again. A really substantial body of work across all genres. Tricky, elusive, difficult, but ultimately rewarding. Then I go back to people like Cordwainer Smith, and then obvious big names like Clarke and Philip K. Dick as well. There's still these writers can still be read with a lot of pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually I am profoundly undereducated in the field of the classic sci-fi names. I honestly haven't read most of the big guns that people throw around. So certainly, Wolfe and Dick and Clarke certainly, but I tend to find a lot of my work tends to be more in dialogue with more recent work, because I mean, to a certain extent, I mean, there's so if you look at say Clarke. A lot of people have already drawn from Clarke. There have been a lot of there's been a lot of work using that as the foundation. So it seems to me that I would rather use as my foundation the people that have already built on Clarke, as it were, rather than going all the way back, because effectively better minds than me have already trod those paths. And
science fiction is in such a healthy place at the moment, I think, in terms of like the opening up of new voices, new approaches to the genre. New ideas about what the boundaries of the genre are. Where does it begin and end? But if you're coming into the field new, there's just so much good stuff just out there that you could probably never catch up with the good stuff. You'd never find time to start really mining the field. So
I mean, for example, I'm a big fan of Dune, but there was in one online group I was in, someone turned up saying, "Well, no one's writing anything like Dune anymore." And I think, well, you've got Nine Fox Gambit, and you've got A Memory Called Empire, and you've got Ancillary Justice, and there's a whole, even in that sort of sub genre, if you want to slice it that thinly, there's a whole roster of excellent recent work that absolutely ticks all those boxes.
Yes, absolutely. Now I'm gonna there's a chap here, Mike Melville. I know Mike, he's a great guy. So I'm going to break protocol again and just... Hi, Mike. Hi, gents. What are you both currently working on?
Do you want to go first?
Okay, well, I've just... I'm very smug because I've just delivered a novel. So I've written another novel, which is called Eversion. And it's a pure standalone, and it's sort of kind of weird. It's a weird take on First Contact, which kind of morphs into sort of hard SF along the way. It starts on a sailing ship off the coast of Norway in sort of late 18th century. So that gives you people are going to pick up on the fact that I like nautical fiction, but it starts there, but it goes into some weird places. So. It's a short, sharp shocker of a novel by my standards. It's much shorter than Inhibitor Phase is something like 160,000 words, and this one's about 80. So it's definitely a shorter novel. And now I'm just starting to think about the next thing. I think I've got to write a novella now, and then gear up to write the next big novel over the autumn. Adrian?
So I'm in a position I've handed in quite a few things that haven't seen the light of day yet, so there is going to be another children of novel that's in the works. The Third Architects book is written, the series is finished. If anyone is particularly worried about me dropping dead before I finish it, it's all done now. You'll get to read it, whatever happens to me. I've just handed in the last of my kind of first phase of novellas I'm doing with Rebellion. Someone mentioned even one day all this will be yours, and this is the third one in that little set after Walking to Aldebaran. It's currently called Put Away Childish Things, and it's about a man in his 30s who discovers that he was supposed to have gone to a Narnia-esque otherworld when he was a child, only he didn't, and it's still out there and it's gone horribly wrong, and now the things that live there have come to get him. So that's fun for everyone except the actual protagonist of the story. I've got a number of things that have just, a bit like Al, that have just gone, and I'm now just tooling up to do a completely new fantasy novel for the first time in quite a few years.
And that will keep you busy through into 2022?
Yeah, I would imagine that'll take me until about, I'll have, hopefully, cross fingers, a working submissible draft in sort of late spring 22, and then various things are kind of nebulously lined up, most of which I can't even talk about at this point.
Good. It's nice to have sort of things to think about, isn't it?
I think I've kind of had a conveyor belt of things for so long now that if it suddenly dried up, I would probably have some sort of dreadful panic attack.
Yeah. Good. How are you feeling, Adrian? Are we close to wrapping up? Do you want to? Was that a wave or just a wave?
Oh, I mean, I'm still good to go.
Okay, because we've got a few more questions here.
Do you want to do kind of some quick fire answers?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So one for you, Adrian. Does Shards of Earth? This is from Patricia. Hi, Patricia. Does Shards of Earth have any connection to One Day All This Will Be Yours?
No.
Right, next question.
Malcolm, do you find dystopic fiction is less fun to write when real life is dystopic?
I don't really do dystopic fiction. I do stuff that gets kind of shades of grey and various miserable scenarios, but I never think of it in dystopic or utopian terms. Life is never one thing, is it? You know, you can have I've had a really crappy year, but there's been good points in that year as well. So you know, things are never wholly one thing, and I've never really felt that what was going on in the real world has had a real one-to-one mapping on what I'm writing. What I'm writing is usually predetermined, but it's what I meant to write 2 years ago, or what I decided I was going to write 2 years ago. You know, so I'm kind of writing because of narrative or creative choices I made, you know, way back before the pandemic. So so I don't really think so.
I mean, for me, I do write work that I definitely think of as dystopic. Specifically, some of the Rebellion novellas like Firewalkers and Ironclads, and the upcoming one Ogres, are specifically, here is a possible dystopia. And I don't know if it's more or less fun, but it's incredibly cathartic sometimes to actually get that stuff out and just say, look, you know, this is potentially where we are going. And, you know, it's probably better than standing in the street corner and shouting it at people live.
Good.
So since Al has written Doctor Who, and I've heard some rumours of Adrian doing something with Black Library, yes, short story out, novella on the way. What are the fun aspects of writing licensed work, and what are the hurdles?
Shall I take a quick stab at that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I had nothing but fun doing my Doctor Who novel. I came to it, I had a deep love of Doctor Who, so that helped. If they'd said, can you write a Firefly book or something like that, so, you know, a universe that I wasn't as committed to, it would maybe would have been a different thing. But I really enjoyed it. I mean, I had to work around certain constraints that were made clear at the time, but I was fine by that. That's the only one I've done. I mean, you know, I'm open for work, guys. If you,
yeah, I mean,
or something like that, you know.
For me, Black Library. I think, like you say, you've got if you like the universe, that is the big pro. Is you get to play with the universe that you enjoy, but at the same time, you've absolutely got to play by whatever rules, however strict they are. I think Doctor Who is probably fairly flexible. Black Library, they're very, very careful about their IP. It's got to work with everything else. So my favorite ever note was I'd mentioned that for my short story, the agriculture world he turned up at was a horrible world. It wasn't like those good, nice ones you'd see. I got a note saying, no, none of the planets in this universe are nice. Everything is horrible. It is the grim darkness of the 41st century. You've got to work with it. I'll ask the next one because this is also for you. I love the concept of instant democracy and polling of the demarchists in the relation space universe, exploring the pros and cons of a kind of direct democracy evolving anarchy. Do either of you know of any other books that explore this concept?
I took the that's from Graham. Hi, Graham. Thanks. I took the title, the word demarchy. I pinched it from Joan D. Vinge, or Joan D. Vinge. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but Joan D. Vinge wrote a fantastic book, a very short science fiction book called Outcasts of Heaven's Belt, or Outcasts of Heaven Belt, and it's about asteroid miners and things like that. And it's all about participatory real-time democracy. I liked the term. I found out that it was a real term, so I wasn't pinching it. I was kind of pinching it indirectly from reality, if you like. So that's where I got that from. I think Joan D. Vinge has used it in one or two of her novels. Not too aware of, I can't off the top of my head think of another science fiction sequence or set of books or book that really gets deep into the nitty-gritty of democracy. But I'm sure they're out there.
I mean, there's the spiders in Children of Time are kind of have an arachno-communist sort of take on government, but I absolutely don't really go into that level of detail as to how they do it a lot of the time. It's just very much sort of interconnected social groups. And you do see it break down at various points in the book as well, I suppose.
Are either of you, this is from Carol Goodwin. Hi, Carol. Are either of you planning to attend any in-person events this year, or will it all be online? If in person, do you know where? I might be looking at going to NovaCon towards the end of this year, which is up in
not
Derbyshire.
Nottingham this time, is it? They've moved.
No, it's not. They couldn't get the hotel in Nottingham or something. So I think it's somewhere like Buxton or somewhere like that. I think I'm sort of hoping to go, but I wouldn't. We'll see how things go with.
Yeah. I mean, I've got the same. I am ideally at BristolCon. I'm actually guest of honouring at BristolCon.
Well, BristolCon's another one I'd like to go to if I can get there that weekend as well. Yeah.
And it'd be lovely to see you there. In that case, assuming we can both actually get there. And also, there's FantasyCon, and I cannot for the life of me remember where it is. I think it's Midlands somewhere in the UK. And then later on in the year, again, all things permitting, all of the stuff that would have happened last year is kind of now happening again. So I'm in Barcelona and in Sweden. Possibly, hopefully.
Good. Well, that's nice. That's nice. One for Adrian here from Nanotyran again. What was the final draft for the third children book? Was that the final draft? Sorry, for the third children book. And which working title is the publisher going to slash this time?
Yes, I have a history of my titles not reaching the shelves. So there's a limit. I've basically been asked not to really talk about this one too much because it's going to be a while before any kind of formal announcement goes out. Yes, it exists. Yes, it's submitted. The working title I have been kicking around is Children of Memory. Whether that is what it ends up being called, who knows? I certainly have very little control over that. Okay, you have already given some hints about it. Do you plan to write House of Suns 2 in the near future? And what do you think about expanding your fiction world over several galaxies? Do you have an urge to think that something that's definitely different there, although general physics should be the same?
That's from Radar. Thank you, Radar. Good friend of mine. I've written a short story in the House of Suns universe, that's the story Belladonna Knights, which is the title story of this collection I got coming out. But I wrote that a few years ago. I've been saying I'm going to do it, another novel, but I think I might back off from that a little bit because I don't want to get into sequel fatigue. I just have this feeling that time's marched on, and that House of Suns is a 14-year-old novel now or 13-year-old novel. does anyone really care? I don't know. I'm not going to hold myself down to one or other viewpoint, but I'm not going to stick my neck out and say I'm definitely going to do a House of Suns 2. I think at this point I'd rather do fully original standalone novels for the time being. But we'll see. I don't want to disappoint people, but I know that contradicts what I've said in the past. But times change.
I mean, to take on the second part, for me, it's gone, but just different series for me are very, very distinct, purely because the histories are different, the technological advances, and frequently the thematic focus is different, even if the actual axioms of the universe are the same. Now,
maybe one more question. I think, Adrian, how do you feel?
Yeah, I think we're getting to that kind of point, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, do you want to just pick your favorite out of the ones we've got?
There's a question for you from G Schneider, 33 again. Adrian, I haven't read any of your work yet. Do you have a recommendation for one to start with?
That's that's very generous of you, Al, to pick that as the last one. You can start with Children of Time. You can start with Doors of Eden. Those are big, solid, hard sci-fi books. I mean, I'm probably kind of obliged to say you can also start with Shards of Earth. It's the beginning of a series. It's space opera. There are space battles. I haven't really had the chance to write proper space battles before. They are enormous fun. So that's, honestly, you could do a lot worse than simply grabbing Shards of Earth, because it's the fresh one out. Good
advice to me. Children of Time is a very, very sort of engaging book that you can pick up and immediately immerse yourself in. But get the new one. Get Shards of Earth. It sounds epic.
I mean, I think you should probably answer the same question. I mean, if someone hasn't read any of your work, what's the best starting point, do you think?
I often say House of Suns because it's one of those ones that a lot of people seem to quite like it. It's a standalone. I still like it. And if you don't like it, you're not committing to reading the whole extended saga.
Okay. I mean, I guess apologies to everyone whose questions we haven't got to.
Sincere apologies, everyone. Thank you for dropping by and posting questions. And
yeah, I mean, feel free. I'm at AptShadow on Twitter. Feel free. If you have any particular questions for me, you can fire them on to me over there.
And if you have any particular questions for me, you can just ask Adrian, because I'm not on Twitter. Just double his workload. Give him more.
Okay, in fact, I'll put that in the chat. All right, and thank you everyone for turning up.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Hopefully we'll see you all in person down the line. And once again, thank you for taking the time to post questions to us. Hope our answers were informative. Always great to hang out with Adrian. Really, really good. We've had fun, and hopefully we haven't bored you to death. So thank you.